What if the man you saved turned out to be the one who could save you back? A wounded stranger rides into a widow's quiet life, carrying secrets that could burn everything she loves to the ground, or build something stronger in its place. This isn't just a Western tale. It's a story about truth redemption and the kind of love that only grows in fire. Stay with us. You won't forget how it ends. The morning air in Red Bluff carried a strange kind of hush, the kind that slips beneath the doorsill and lingers in the lungs. It was the sort of stillness old folks say comes before something shifts, before news arrives or storms roll in. Isabel Turner knew the signs. She'd seen them the day her husband fell from the silo and the day they buried half the town's crops under a summer frost. This morning felt the same. She was hanging laundry on the line, fingers raw from the wind, when the shape appeared in the distance, more shadow than man, more stagger than ride. The bay gelding he sat atop didn't gallop or trot. It limped, sides heaving like it had carried its burden farther than any animal should be asked. The rider slumped low, his hat dipping like a wilted leaf, one arm hanging useless, the other clutching something close ribs, maybe, or a secret. She squinted against the light, a clothespin between her teeth, the linen in her hands forgotten. There was something unnatural about the way he moved, or didn't move. Something that stopped the air in her chest. Caleb and Sarah were still inside the house, curled up under quilts she'd stitched from scraps. She should have gone inside too. Locked the door, pretended she hadn't seen. But her boots moved before her thoughts could stop them. When the horse reached the fence line, it didn't wait for command. It halted like it had met an old friend, like it knew somehow that the woman walking toward it had salt in her soul and softness in her bones. "You alive?" Isabel asked, her voice rough from silence. The man didn't speak, didn't lift his head, but he breathed shallow and cracked like a barn door in winter. That was enough. She reached up, hand brushing against the horse's damp neck, and felt the tremble of exhaustion. It was the kind of shaking that didn't stop, not with rest, not with time. Caleb ran out when she called, sleepy-eyed but steady, and together they pulled the stranger down. His body folded like a scarecrow in the wind, too broken to resist, too stubborn to fall apart completely. She didn't bring him to the house, not yet. The barn was closer, safer. Less of a risk to her children, her peace. She didn't know who he was, and in Red Bluff that meant something. Strangers brought stories. Stories brought bullets. They laid him on a pile of old straw, the smell of hay, and old oil mixing with the scent of dried blood. His shirt was torn, soaked through with sweat, and crusted black where the wound had gone too long unattended. A bruise spread across his temple like spilled ink. And yet, in the curve of his jaw, in the still-set mouth, Isabel saw something that wasn't broken. Not yet. She worked fast, quietly. Years of tending to sick animals and stubborn husbands had taught her hands to move without hesitation. She cleaned what she could, stitched what needed closing, wrapped his ribs with a torn feed sack. 2 bullet grazes. One deep enough to scare, the other angry and red with infection. She knew what it meant. Fever, maybe worse. Sarah, she called, and her daughter ran in barefoot with water and cloths. They pressed them to his lips, wiped the grime from his brow, cooled his skin. He flinched once, groaned, then went still again. Isabel didn't ask questions that night. Not out loud, but her mind ran them in circles as she sat by the barn door, rifle across her lap. She didn't know what kind of man fate had delivered to her fence line, but she knew men, had seen them kind, cruel cunning. This one didn't fit any mold. He didn't come with bluster or charm. He came with silence, and silence could mean anything. The wind picked up as night fell, brushing against the boards like a whisper, too faint to hear. Caleb peeked in once, offered her a blanket. She waved him off. she would not sleep. Somewhere past midnight the man stirred. His lips moved without sound. His eyes cracked open barely. Pale gray. The color of stone after rain. Water, he rasped. She gave it to him without a word. He drank slowly as if the moment might disappear if he moved too fast. "You got a name?" she asked. He blinked, considered. Then, almost too soft to catch Jonah. She didn't ask for more. Just sat back and listened to the barn breathe. Jonah. No last name, no history, just a man with gunpowder in his blood and silence in his eyes. It wasn't the first time Isabel had saved someone, but it was the first time she wondered if doing so might tear her whole world apart. Jonah didn't ask to be part of their lives, but he became part of it anyway. Like the morning frost or the creak in the barn door, quiet, uninvited, but eventually expected. Each day he got a little stronger, and each day Isabel felt a little more off balance. He never talked about his past, never mentioned why he had 2 bullet wounds or what had driven him to collapse on her land. But there was something in the way he fixed things, not just with tools and rope, but with silence and presence that made it hard to look away. She found him early one morning, standing by the fence line. He was shirtless, bandages still wrapped tight across his ribs, and he was hammering a broken rail back into place. His movements were slow, deliberate, every muscle tense with pain, but he didn't stop. Isabel leaned on the porch post, arms crossed. "You're supposed to be resting," she called. He didn't look up. "I reckon you've done enough for me. I didn't save you to be polite." "No," he said, finally turning to face her. "But it's the only way I know to say thank you." That was the beginning. Not of something obvious, not a declaration or decision, but of a quiet rhythm. A man, once broken, mending what he could. A woman, once guarded, watching it all. Caleb was the first to fall in step. He followed Jonah everywhere, asking questions, bringing him pieces of wood to carve, and mimicking the way Jonah tied knots or checked the skies for rain. Sarah would skip beside him too, asking about stars and flowers, and if horses had dreams. Jonah never answered much, but he always listened. One day, Caleb burst through the door with a wild grin. "Mama Jonah made me a slingshot, a real one with leather and everything." Isabel smiled, but said nothing. That night she found the slingshot resting on Caleb's windowsill beside a carefully carved wooden bird. Jonah kept busy. He mended the chicken coop, patched the porch roof, and dug out a new drainage path by the root cellar. Isabel watched him from a distance, unsure what unsettled her more, how capable he was, or how comforting his presence had become. Sometimes at night she'd see him standing just outside the barn, looking at the sky like it held an answer to a question he didn't want to ask. She never joined him. Not at first. But one evening, after a long day spent hauling water and chopping wood, she found herself drawn outside. He was sitting near the barn, a small fire in front of him, carving something from a chunk of oak. She sat beside him without a word. He didn't look at her, just kept carving. "You always this quiet?" she asked. He paused, then nodded. "What are you making a horse?" he said simply. "For Sarah." "No, for me." She raised a brow. "You collect them." He stopped carving, eyes still on the fire. "I remember them. The ones I rode, the ones I lost." There was weight in those words. Isabel didn't press. Instead, she leaned back. Let the silence sit between them. It wasn't uncomfortable, just full. Days passed. Jonah moved more freely now, still favoring his side, but carrying buckets from the well, and helping Caleb fix a broken wagon wheel. He taught the boy how to track small animals, and how to whittle a whistle from a sapling branch. Sarah brought Jonah wildflowers, and he'd press them between paper and return them as bookmarks. But not everything was easy. One afternoon, Caleb approached Isabel out behind the house, worry written across his freckled face. "You don't trust him, do you?" She looked up from peeling apples. "Why do you ask? I saw you watching him. Like you're waiting for something." "I'm always watching," she said gently. Caleb hesitated, then nodded. "I think he's sad, but not bad." Isabel wanted to tell him that people could be both, but she didn't, because the truth was she wasn't sure either. That night the wind came up strong from the west. It rattled the shutters and shook loose memories Isabel had tried to bury. She found herself on the porch again, a mug of coffee cooling in her hands, eyes on the barn. Jonah was there sitting on the roof of the tack shed, eyes to the stars. She stepped outside, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "You always look at the sky." He glanced down. "Only when I'm afraid I'll forget something." She walked to the edge of the porch. "And do you? Sometimes." She didn't ask what he meant. Instead, she went back inside and returned with an old wool blanket. She left it folded on the barn door. By morning, it was gone. The next day, a bundle of kindling sat on her porch, split and tied neat. On top of it was a small wooden horse, unfinished but beautiful. Jonah Ridge was still a stranger, but he was no longer unknown. And Isabel Turner, who had once closed every door to grief, now found herself wondering what it might be like to open one again. It began with dust, fine and red, as rust stirring along the edge of the Turner property. Isabel saw it first while pouring water at the porch well. A thin cloud, where there shouldn't have been any moving with a quiet purpose like breath across a rifle barrel. She didn't call out. Just set the bucket down, dried her hands, and stepped into the house for her shotgun. No panic, just instinct. Red Bluff wasn't a place for surprises, not anymore. Jonah noticed the same dust. He'd been teaching Caleb how to lash 2 cedar branches together, a simple skill, but one that made Caleb feel older than his 9 years. Jonah looked toward the horizon, that quiet stillness in his eyes hardening. He handed the rope back to the boy and stood. No words, no hurry, just the quiet preparation of a man who had outrun trouble but never escaped it. When the riders came, there were 3. They didn't charge or shout. They came slow, like a fever, like a memory, all dressed in black dusters, wide-brimmed hats, hiding half their faces. Their horses were mean-eyed and silent. They didn't dismount when they reached the fence line, just sat their saddles like they owned the air around them. "Ma'am," said the tallest voice, dry and full of old nails. "We're looking for someone." Isabel didn't blink. "Plenty of folks out here. This one's particular. Man riding wounded. Might go by Jonah Ridge. Might not. Carried a satchel with property that don't belong to him." Behind her, Caleb stepped onto the porch, wooden horse in hand. The tallest rider noticed. His eyes narrowed not at the boy, but at the open barn door behind the house. He wasn't talking to Isabel anymore. He was watching for movement, for confirmation. "I don't know anyone by that name," Isabel said, voice calm. "And even if I did, you'd best have more than questions if you're looking to ride through my gates." The second rider smirked. "You sound like someone protecting something, ma'am." Isabel lifted her chin. "And you sound like someone about to find out I'm better at shootin' than talkin'." That was when Jonah stepped out from the barn, slow and deliberate. His shirt was stained with sweat, the Colt revolver resting against his thigh. "I'm right here," he said. The air cracked with tension. For a long heartbeat, no one moved. Then the tall rider leaned forward, sneering. "Should have stayed dead, Ridge." Jonah didn't flinch. That's the trouble with ghosts. They come back for the unfinished. Isabel didn't lower her shotgun. "What do you want?" The rider's smile vanished. "We want what he took, and we want the silence that comes after." When the 3 turned and rode off, it was not with retreat but with promise. They'd be back. Isabel knew it, Jonah knew it too. That night, Jonah sat on the edge of the barn loft, his hand tracing the grooves of the Colt's grip like it held answers. Isabel brought him coffee still warm, set it beside him without a word. She sat in the dirt below, knees drawn to her chest, looking up. "They'll be back," she said. "I know. You gonna tell me why?" He nodded once, slowly. "My brother James, he had good land up near Telluride, built it from nothing. We'd planned to run cattle-raised barns, maybe even families someday. Then Ferris Mining Company came. Claimed they had deeds, said our land was theirs. But James had the real deed. From a judge proper signed. He wouldn't sell, wouldn't run. So they burned him out. Shot him in front of the house. Isabel stared at her hands, knuckles white. I was away, downriver. Came back to smoke and blood, found the map the letter James left, took it, ran. They caught me once, shot me twice. I made it this far. Why here, I didn't know where else to fall. There was silence again, but this time it hummed with grief and something more powerful resolve. You still got the papers, she asked. He nodded. In the satchel. She rose and walked into the barn, came back with the worn leather bag. Inside, a folded survey map marked in red ink, a notarized deed, and a letter in neat handwriting. Isabel read the first line aloud. If you're reading this, Jonah, it means I'm gone. Her voice caught. She folded the letter again and handed it back. We need to take this to someone who can do more than listen. They own half the county, Jonah said. They don't own me. He looked at her for a long time. The weight in his eyes wasn't suspicion. It was gratitude and fear. I didn't mean to bring this on you, but you did, she said, so now we finish it together. That night, as coyotes howled on the ridge, and Caleb lay asleep holding his wooden horse, Isabel oiled her husband's rifle for the first time in years. Jonah sharpened a blade he hadn't used since before the gunshots. And in the quiet barn where stories had only been whispered before, two people decided to speak their truth loud enough for justice to hear. They didn't know how long they had before those riders returned, but they knew what they were fighting for now. Not land, not vengeance, but a name, and for the right to live without running ever again. It started with the smell. Not the warm scent of firewood or the clean tang of morning dew, but the acrid stench of smoke creeping low across the fields. Isabel Turner knew that smell. Everyone who'd lived long enough in Red Bluff did. It was the smell of warning, of something being taken before its time. She stood barefoot in the doorway, the rifle already in her hands, and listened. The night was too quiet. No owl calls, no rustling grass. Even the chickens had hushed as if they knew trouble had settled in the valley. A faint glow rose behind the barn, the wrong kind of light for stars. Flames licking the dry brush, hungry and fast. Then came the crackle, sharp as gunfire. She didn't yell. She turned. Caleb, Sarah. She called, her voice firm but calm, downstairs. Now. Jonah was already outside, his silhouette outlined by fire. He didn't speak, just grabbed the water barrels and began dousing the perimeter. Isabel ran to the pump heart, hammering in her chest, shoulders burning with effort. The fire was deliberate, she knew that now. It wasn't the wind or carelessness. This was kindling laid with a purpose. A shot rang out. Dirt exploded inches from Jonah's boots. Get to cover, he shouted, diving behind the wagon. Isabel rolled behind the old trough rifle pressed to her cheek. Two riders stood atop the ridge, their faces black in the firelight, rifles raised. We just want the papers, Ridge, one of them called. Give it up, and we'll be on our way. Jonah didn't answer. His jaw was tight, his breathing heavy. Blood ran fresh from his arm. Jonah, Isabel shouted, crawling to him. You're hit. It's nothing, he said through clenched teeth. Liar, she muttered, tearing a strip of cloth from her shirt. He fumbled with his satchel and shoved it into her hands. "If I don't make it, take this." "Show the judge. Don't let them win." "You're not dying on me," she snapped. He gave a half smile, not planning on it. "But they are." She rose from behind the wagon and fired. One bullet struck the dirt. The next found its mark slamming into the thigh of the younger rider. He screamed and fell from his horse. The third man bolted, reins snapping, retreating into the hills. Smoke thickened around them, choking and wild. The flames hissed and retreated where they could, but the barn roof was catching. Jonah stumbled to his feet, tried to stamp it out, but his legs gave. Isabel threw a wet sack over the fire and pulled him away just in time. They collapsed behind the barn as the last of the blaze sputtered. The night was dark again, save for the glow of embers and the occasional flicker of flame dying in the dirt. Caleb and Sarah ran to them, covered in soot but safe. Isabel pulled them close, all of them breathing hard, surrounded by the smell of smoke and ash. They stayed like that until the sun crept up slow and sullen, revealing the damage. Half the chicken coop was gone. The fence line blackened. The old sycamore tree behind the barn smoldered like an old wound. But they were alive. Later that morning, Isabel walked the property alone. She found the rider she'd shot lying by the ridge, bleeding and pale. She didn't shoot him again. She just stared. He looked up at her with hate and fear and something like shame. "You don't have to bury me," he said. "I ain't doing it for you," she replied. "I'm doing it for the land." They dug the grave by the creek where the earth was softer. Jonah didn't say much, just worked beside Caleb, one hand pressed to his bandaged shoulder. When it was done, they marked the spot with a stone. "He was someone's son," Isabel said quietly. Jonah nodded. That night, after the children were asleep, and the wind had shifted, bringing with it the promise of rain, Isabel brought the satchel inside. She opened it slowly. Inside were 4 things, the map stained and folded, the deed creased but legible, the letter from Jonah's brother James, and a photograph. 2 boys' arms slung around each other, grinning on horseback. She read the letter again. "If you're reading this, Jonah, it means I'm gone. But the fight ain't just mine now, it's yours. For every man they'll steal from next, for every family they'll burn out. You've got the truth, don't let them bury it." Isabel folded the letter and placed it back inside. She looked at Jonah, who sat at the kitchen table, staring at his own hands. "You're not running from the law," she said. "No," he replied. "You're running from injustice." He looked up, eyes tired. "And from what I couldn't save." "Well," she said, "let's finish what your brother started." Jonah blinked hard, then nodded. They spent the next day preparing. Jonah worked with Caleb to brace the barn door with steel rods from the tool shed. Isabel cleaned her late husband's Winchester with practiced hands. Sarah packed bread and apples into an old flour sack. No one spoke about leaving, but it was understood. When evening came, Jonah stood by the creek, staring east. Isabel joined him, arms crossed, heart steady. "You ready to ride?" she asked. "I've been ready for a long time," he said. She smiled. "Good. Because we've got work to do." The trail to Denver wasn't lined with heroes or applause. It was narrow-broken in places and soaked in the memory of fire and blood. Isabel sat beside Jonah in the wagon, her rifle laid across her lap, her eyes fixed on the distant ridges. Caleb and Sarah huddled in the back, bundled in wool, quiet in a way that only children who've seen too much can be. They didn't cry. They didn't ask when they'd be home. They just watched their mother's hands because hands told the truth when voices couldn't. Jonah didn't say much on the road, he never had. But something in his silence had changed. It wasn't the silence of hiding anymore. It was the silence of someone who had found something to believe in again. He kept the satchel, close fingers brushing the edge like it might disappear if he let go. Every now and then he'd look at Isabel when she wasn't looking, and every time he seemed to be reminding himself that this was real, that they were still alive. They traveled by night, rested during the day. When they could, they avoided the main roads, skirting through gullies and hollows, crossing frozen streams where the wagon wheels shuddered and groaned. More than once, Jonah had to climb down and push with his good arm while Isabel steered. Each time she offered no complaint, only a glance, and that was enough. On the third night, they camped in an old mining shed halfway up a slope outside Castle Rock. Isabel lit a small fire inside, careful not to let the smoke rise too high. The children slept near the wall, and Jonah sat cross-legged holding the letter from his brother in both hands. Isabel watched him for a while before she finally spoke. "Do you ever think about what it would have been like if none of this happened?" He didn't look up. "Every day, do you think you'd still be running cattle with James?" He nodded. He was the one with the plans. "I just followed." She leaned back against the wall. "Well, you've got a new plan now." He smiled, but it was small and sad. "That's what scares me." When they arrived in Denver, the city wasn't what Isabel had imagined. It wasn't shining or grand. It was tired, dusty. The courthouse stood tall, but not proud like a man who'd taken too many hits, but kept standing out of habit. Inside, the clerk behind the desk didn't even glance up at first. Isabel stepped forward and placed the satchel on the counter. "We need to see Judge Hannity," she said. The clerk raised an eyebrow. "Got business." Jonah stepped forward and opened the satchel. He laid the deed, the map, the photograph, and the letter on the counter. The clerk read the name. Ridge. His eyes widened slightly. "I'll see if the judge is in." 15 minutes later, they stood in front of Judge Hannity, a man with iron-colored hair and lines around his mouth that spoke of years wrestling the law. "You're Jonah Ridge?" he asked. "Yes, sir." Hannity picked up the letter and read in silence for a long while. Then he looked up. "I'd heard rumors. Stories about land theft, forged deeds, even arson, but no one ever had proof. Until now." Jonah said nothing. Isabel did. They burned his brother alive. Judge burned his home, shot him for carrying the truth. Hannity folded the letter slowly. "Well, Mr. Ridge, we've got work to do." Over the next 2 days, the law moved faster than Isabel expected. Warrants were signed. Names were written. Men once feared in 3 counties found themselves with charges pinned to their backs. Jonah's name was cleared. The land deed was authenticated. Ferrous Mining's influence, long protected by fear and silence, began to crumble like dried-out clay. When it was over, the judge handed Jonah a new copy of the deed, this one certified and recorded. "You're the rightful owner now," he said. "No one can take that from you." Jonah nodded, but he didn't smile. He stared down at the paper like it weighed more than it should. Outside, as the sun dropped low over the buildings, Jonah and Isabel sat on the courthouse steps. She held Caleb's hand, Sarah resting her head in her lap. Jonah held the paper in one hand, the photograph in the other. "You got what you came for," she said softly. He shook his head. "I got what James died for. That's not the same." "But it's something she said." He nodded. "Yeah, it's something. They didn't ride back to Red Bluff. Instead, they turned west toward Telluride. The land was rough, but it was honest. That spring they built a house on the ridge James once claimed. A small house. Nothing fancy. But it held laughter again. It held roots. Isabel planted corn. Jonah built a fence. Caleb and Sarah ran free in fields that had once been soaked in ash. And one morning, under a sky so blue it hurt the eyes, Jonah pulled a small ring from his pocket. "I ain't much of a preacher," he said, "but I'd like to build something honest. With you." Isabel looked at him a long time. Then she nodded. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the chickens settled into their coop, she sang softly while folding laundry. It wasn't a hymn, just a song her mother used to hum when she thought no one was listening. Jonah sat on the porch watching the light stretch across the hills. In the distance, a rider approached, but this time it brought no fear, just mail. A letter from Judge Hannity. Justice had been served. The men responsible were in jail. The land recorded. The truth made whole. Jonah folded the letter and placed it inside the satchel, now worn, but no longer heavy. That night, Caleb asked, "What now?" Ridge Jonah thought for a long while. "I plant things," he said, "like corn, like peace." And that was how the valley remembered them. Not as victims, not as outlaws, but as people who turned pain into promise and silence into a song. Jonah Ridge rode into Red Bluff as a shadow of a man clinging to life by a thread and secrets by a tighter grip. He had no place, no name worth speaking, and nothing left but the truth his brother died protecting. When Isabel Turner found him near death, she didn't know she was opening the door, not just to a stranger but to a storm. Her choice to help a wounded man sparked a reckoning, long overdue one that brought justice to the forgotten and dignity back to the land. Through fire, betrayal, silence, and fear, Jonah and Isabel's story unfolded as more than a tale of survival. It became a testament to the healing power of compassion, to the strength it takes to trust again after loss, and to the quiet kind of courage that doesn't shout but holds the line. Jonah wasn't a hero in the traditional sense. He didn't come with grand speeches or bold declarations. He came with guilt, with grief, and a letter that bore the weight of a murdered brother's hopes. And Isabel, she was no damsel in need of rescue. She was a woman who'd already endured her share of loss and hardship. But in Jonah, she saw not just a man needing shelter, but a soul trying to make something right. Her strength wasn't loud, but it was unshakable. She protected her home, her children, and eventually Jonah himself, not just with a rifle, but with grace and clarity. Their journey took them from the smoldering edge of their property to the cold halls of justice in Denver, where proof finally had a voice. Together, they faced men who used power to crush the powerless, and used fear as a tool of silence. And in the end, truth won, not with vengeance, but with resolve. Their return to Telluride, to the ridge James once loved, was more than a homecoming. It was an act of restoration. In rebuilding that land, they weren't just constructing fences and walls. They were building a life founded on integrity, family, and the kind of peace that grows slowly, but roots deeply. Jonah, who had once only known how to run, chose to stay, chose to plant, chose to love. And Isabel, who had only ever known how to endure, chose to trust again. Their children thrived, the land healed, and the community they created became a quiet beacon for what's possible when ordinary people stand up against the weight of injustice. The story of Jonah Ridge and Isabel Turner is not just one of the Old West. It's a human story, one of loss and redemption, of love rising from ruin, and of how the smallest acts of kindness can change the course of history. It reminds us that silence, when chosen wisely, can be powerful, but silence in the face of wrongdoing must never be mistaken for peace. So, what can we learn from their journey, and how can it guide us today? First, we learn that the truth is worth fighting for, even when it's dangerous, even when it costs us comfort, even when it feels like we're standing alone. In a world where lies often echo louder than facts, holding on to what's right is a quiet kind of rebellion. Whether it's standing up for a neighbor challenging corruption, or simply living with honesty, integrity matters. It shapes legacies far beyond what we can see. Second, we're reminded that kindness isn't weakness. When Isabel opened her barn to a bleeding stranger, she wasn't showing fragility, she was displaying moral strength. In our modern lives, it's easy to close off to see the world through lenses of suspicion and self-protection. But real strength often lies in the willingness to risk empathy. Third healing doesn't come from forgetting. It comes from facing the past, from honoring what was lost, and from choosing to build something new despite the scars. Jonah didn't pretend his brother hadn't died. He carried that pain, but he used it not to destroy, but to create a future James would have been proud of. Finally, their story teaches us that peace is something we plant. It's not found. It's not gifted. It's grown slowly, patiently, with sweat and love and hard choices. And it only takes root when we stop running. If you've followed this journey from the first dusty hoofbeats on Isabel's land to the quiet laughter of a family rebuilding in Telluride, thank you. These stories matter not just because they entertain, but because they reflect something eternal, our hunger for justice, our hope for redemption, and our belief that the human spirit, no matter how bruised, can rise again. If this story touched your heart, reminded you of someone you love, or sparked a memory you'd long buried, I invite you to join us in keeping stories like this alive. Please subscribe to our channel, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and help us keep creating more tales that honor truth, bravery, and the quiet power of love. Every like, comment, and follow gives us the strength to ride out again, with more stories, more legends, and more reminders that even in the wildest parts of the West, humanity always finds a way home.